Hi, Doko here. Welcome back to my channel. So today what we're going to do is have a look at RPA challenge, but we're going to use coded automation using C# workflows to implement the solution to the RPA challenge. I'm sure you're all familiar with this challenge. It's just you download an Excel file which contains 10 rows of data. You then loop through those rows of data and input the data into these fields and click submit 10 times, and then it will give you a score based on how fast you managed to implement it. So what we'll do is we'll swing over to UiPath Studio, and here what I've done is I've already created a project which is basically a C# project, and at the moment we've just got an empty main. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the Excel file from the RPA challenge. We need to download this Excel file and then read it into our project as a data table. So what I'm going to do for this is just do the standard procedure, reading it in using Excel in a XAML file rather than using C# or a third-party tool to do that. So I just want to show you how we would read it in and how we would call it from a C# workflow. So we'll click on that. We'll download the file. We will then go copy the file. Once we've copied the file, what we'll then do is we will put it in our project directory. So we come up here, open the project directory, and place the file in here. So you can see I've got challenge 7. I've downloaded this obviously 7 times, so I'll just change the name to challenge. And then what we're going to do is we just want to read that in using our standard technique. So I'll use a workflow activity, a read range. So we'll search for our read range. And we want to use our read range in our workbook. So this is just the standard procedure that you're all used to. Pick the challenge file. And the sheet name is sheet 1. Data's in sheet 1. And then we want to output this to a data table. So we'll just call it DT data. Just Control K that. Okay, so we've got our variable DT data, and we've basically read our data table. Now what we want to do is we will do our processing in C# workflow, so rather than in our XAML. Now obviously in all practicality we wouldn't use a coded workflow to do this exercise, but I'm just showing you for the demonstration purposes, so we'll just call it workflow. Obviously we'd rename it. So you can see it comes up with some boilerplate code here. What we then want to do is first thing we want to do is call the Excel over here. We want to have this as our main entry point into the program, and then we'll call the read range and get the data table over here in our C#. So in order to do that, what I've done here, just for demonstration purposes, is I have my snippets. I've added in some snippets here. And you can see I've added in coded automation snippets, so these are ones I've obviously created earlier. So I've got one for run workflow, I've got some ChatGPT ones, and some type and click options. So here I just want to do a run workflow. So let's say I've forgotten the syntax of what run workflow is. I can just go over to my snippets, and I've got in here a snippet that returns a data table, which is what we're using here. And obviously as you're developing, you'd add more to your snippets. Now the thing is with the snippets, it doesn't allow you to add C# code files in your snippets. So what I've done here, if I open one of these snippets, is I've actually put my code in as a comment in a XAML file, because I'm not allowed to add it as a .cs file as a snippet. Studio doesn't detect it; it only detects XAML files as snippets. So what I want to do, I can see I've got a workflow if I want to return 0 parameters, so I'll just copy that snippet there, go back to my workflow, and paste that in. Now what we see here is we're calling a workflow, and the workflow we're calling that returns the data table is main. And you can see this dictionary here just is the parameters that get passed in. In this case, nothing gets passed in because our parameters, we've just got these fixed strings challenge in sheet 1. So nothing's get passed in, but what we want to be passed back is actually the data table. So at the moment, you'll see that the DT data is actually a variable. So we want to make that into an argument. So we convert to an argument. And then we want this to be an out argument, so we can return it back to the calling function. So it has to be an out argument. So we come over here and we'll just create a table in our C#. So we'll just call it data. The result here, this result being returned back from the run workflow. The run workflow, you can see it returns a dictionary, so it could return multiple output objects, and we want to select the data table only. We've only got one output object, so we need to specify the lookup into the dictionary that gets returned. So this is an object basically, or a dictionary. So we will tell it that we want the data, which is the only one, and we want to convert that into a data table. So this is just a conversion, so that this now becomes a data table type within our C# code. So now we should have our data. The next thing we want to do after we have our data is we want to start looping through the data and typing it into that form in RPA challenge. So what we've got here is we need to click this start button and we need to start typing things in. So in order to do the UI part of doing C# workflows, we need to have all of these in our object repository so we can access them in the code. So we need to create an object repository that allows us then to go through and type into each of these and then click these buttons. So we go back to our studio and we see nothing's in our object repository. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an application, and we'll just call it an RPA challenge. Just any name will do. Put a description in. I'm not going to do that now. Create an application. So we'll start recording. Get the phone number. Save and continue. Get the email. Save and continue, etc. So we'll continue this. We'll get the submit button and the start button. We come back over here and look in our object repository, and everything's in there. Our two buttons and our input fields. Now, what we need to do is, if we want to start typing information into these fields or clicking buttons, the first thing we need to do for the exercise is we need to click this start button. So we need to obviously get access to the screen. So in order to do that, we need to do a UI automation, and we need to open the appropriate screen, which would be this one. RPA challenge is the name of the screen. So in order to get the exact name, I'll just copy that from here, paste it in here. I could have just typed it, of course. And that will open the screen for us. Now what we then need to do is start doing type intos. So in order to do a type into, if we wanted to type into the address field, for example, we would do a type into, so we do an S type into, and then we would specify we want to type into the object repository element called address. And then what we need to do is specify what we'd actually want to type. So if let's just say we wanted to type 21 Jump Street, and that would be the format of what we'd like to type. So that would basically run it and type into that particular field. Now, of course, if we were writing the code, we would want to click the start button first. So we would have s.click, and then the start button to start off the whole process would be btn start, and then we'd click the start button and then we'd type into. So if we ran that now, and we run it, and then we see the result. Click round 1 and the address is 21 Jump Street. So that's the basic idea here. So we'll just refresh that and go back to our code over here. So what we want to do basically is do that for all the fields, for all the rows. So we could manually type in all of these strings, but I prefer to use a class, a public static class for these. So basically what I want to do is I want to get all of these strings into a static class with public static strings, so that I can then just access the elements of the class for each of these elements within the object repository. So I want to extract these strings out instead of manually typing in all of these type intos. So in order to do that, I'm going to use ChatGPT just to generate. So what I've done is I've actually created a small workflow, like a helper bot that allows me to extract this information, these strings out. So in order to do that, I need to type click capture elements here, and it'll pop up, and I'm basically going to extract these strings out. My bot's going to extract these strings out for me. So I've got a bot here. I'll just run it. This is just a shortcut to my automation helper. So all it's going to do is allow me to extract these strings out and put them in a static class. This is just a productivity tool to help me speed up my automations. So we run this, and it pops up with a message that's asking me either to get Excel headers or the object repository text. In this case, we want the object repository text. So I'll click on that, and a message box pops up and asks me to open the particular screen that I'm interested in. So I've already done that, so I'll just click OK, and then it will extract the strings for me and put them into a notepad file. So basically paste them into a notepad file. It just saves me from typing them manually. So what I want to do, and you can see I've got a file here, a sentence up here, which I just want to use ChatGPT to create the static class for me instead of me manually typing it. So I'll remove these because these two are just the application and the page name. So I just want the actual data. So what I'll do is I'll just copy that and I'll go to ChatGPT. And then inside here, I'll just paste in that request. So basically, I'm just asking ChatGPT to generate a static class for me, and I'll run that. And it should return back some code for me, and I'll just check to see if that's the correct code. Okay, so all I'm doing is static read-only strings, and I'm just assigning the strings to be corresponding elements. So copy the code. Now I'm not using this to generate code for me, although it is. It's just a time-saving mechanism. So I'm just showing you, potentially you could use this as for time-saving or to generate code. So I'll go back to my code, and what I want to do is I just want to paste in that static class that was generated so that I can use it in my code. So I'll just paste that in. I'll just neaten this up a bit. Okay, and then what I want to do the same thing for my Excel file. So I'll go back to my helper, my automation helper, and I will get the Excel file headers, and that'll just do the same thing, generate a string for me, well, allow me to generate a string. So I pick the challenge file, which is, I'll get the right directory, RPA challenge, click the challenge file. It doesn't really matter, it's the same file. And basically what it does, it extracts the headers out of the Excel file. Now of course I could have just opened the Excel file and copied and pasted them, but I mean, since I've got the helper, I'll just use the helper. Then I'll go back to ChatGPT, and I'll generate the class for the Excel file, and it should give me a nice class, first name, etc. So that's what I want. So it's just giving me a shortcut instead of me typing this manually. So I'll go back to my code and paste this in, and put a couple of tabs in there. Okay, so I've got my class for my elements, my object repository elements. I've got my class for my data. So what I want to do is I want to loop through each of the data in my data table, and I want to copy the data from here into the corresponding fields over in Elms. So in order to do that, I want to basically do type intos. I want to do type intos that will allow me to type the data into each of these fields. So I want to have a loop and I want to have a type into. So to do a type into, I just do type into, and then I will say, okay, address and whatever data. So the data might be hello. Okay, so I've already shown you this. So this is the format. So rather than me, for each of the elements, going and creating these type intos, I'll get ChatGPT to do it for me. So since I've already generated these, I just want to make a mapping from data onto elements. So I'll instruct ChatGPT to do that for me. So I've already previously had a look at the correct wording for this. So I'll be using this a lot in other projects. So I just created this as a snippet. And then I'll go over to my ChatGPT and type in my request. DT results. So I've got DT results here. I think I called it DT data, so I'll just use the same name. It doesn't really matter. I can change it later, but since the table is called DT data. So I'm just asking it to generate the assignments for me. So you can see it's looping through the data table. It's giving me the code to loop through the data table and assign the values. So I then copy that code, come over to my workflow file, and basically paste that in. I will remove this. This is just some comment from ChatGPT, and then I'll just check the fields. Let me just format this, put a few tabs in. Now I'm getting address, first name, last name, company, role, email, phone. So yes, it's given me the correct data. It hasn't put in, it might have put in the buttons, but it hasn't. So it's smart enough to realize that there are no buttons over here that map onto. It's just data. So once I've copied the fields in here, all I want to do then is at the end of each loop, I want to click that submit button. So over here, I click the start button, I start typing into, and then I click the submit button, type into, click the submit button. So at the bottom of the loop here, I just basically want to do an S click, and what I want to click is elms dot, and you can see if I had a lot of code here, I could use these rather than having strings. So this is the advantage, and anything that changes, if any of these actual strings change, I just change it up the top. I'm not searching through my code. So in most of these workflows, you shouldn't have long, complicated code. It should be fairly short, but this allows you to just have a standard format where your strings are always at the top, and then you just use your IntelliSense here to select the right one. So what I want to do is click the submit button, and also you might notice if we go back, this was hard-coded as start button, so I could change that now that I've created my elms. I could change that to elms dot button start, and essentially we loop through, we click the start button, we loop through, and we start putting the data in. So if we run this now, we'll save it and we'll run it, and we'll see how it goes. So click the start button and start typing in. Now something's going to go wrong here because the last name is not, so you can see there's a problem here. So we'll go back to our code, and it says the column last name does not belong to the data table. Okay, that is because in the Excel file, the file name, last name, as you're probably aware, is last name with a space. So what we do is we go back to the Excel file, check this name, and realize there was a space at the end, and then we need to add a space in so the names match up. So over in our data over here, the column name is actually last name space, so we just add the space in here. Now, of course, we could go and fix the Excel file instead, but it depends where if the Excel file was external, then maybe we can't change the source, so we change it in here. So it depends on your situation. So now if we rerun this, so we will refresh this. So we get back to the starting position again, and we run it again. And this time it should work. I mean, the data at least should go in. So you can see the start button, and then we start typing the address, the first name. Then when we get to last name, it should be fine. So last name's not an issue. Company name, role in the company, etc. And then it will click through, type through. So if we wanted to speed this up, so everything works fine, and then we could speed this up. So let's just stop this. And what we'll do is if we wanted to, so currently this is using hardware events. You can see when I was using the mouse, it was grabbing the mouse back. So if we wanted to change this to use simulate type and simulate click, we want to change it at the screen level up here. Type. If we wanted to change this to simulate, you can see here if we go to UI automation, and if we put a comma here, you can see that it accepts a second argument called target app options. So we can use target app options to set the input mode to simulate. So to do that, we can create a variable called target app ops. We do a control space, and we create a variable called target app option and equals new target app options. I'll just copy that. And then we'll have a look at what's available. So we say TAO dot, and then our IntelliSense helps us here. So we can see, if we scroll down, we can see the options available. So what we want to look for is interaction mode equals, and then what we want to know what we can set it to. So if we highlight this, we'll see N interactive mode is the type. So we type in interactive mode, and then we do our dot, and then we want to know, is it in the background, is it hardware events, is it simulate? So what we do, we obviously select our simulate here. So that means at the screen level it will change everything to simulate, just like in your normal XAML workflows. So we add our parameter here, which is our TAO, and then if we run it again, it should be using the simulate rather than the hardware events. So we run it, and we see the outcome. We see that it's typing simulate, using simulate. So that's how you get your properties. Okay, so it's giving me an error. So the reason it's giving me an error is because currently I haven't got my RPA challenge open, and by default it doesn't open it when I'm using the target application options. So TAO.open mode, and then I would check what type is the open mode, and I see that it's a in-app open mode. In-app open mode, and then I check the options, and always open. These are just the normal properties. So this is how you'd access your properties. So I want to open it if it's not open. So I'll set that, and then if I run it again, it now should work. It should open my web page and run. So now it's running, and we see the result, whether it opens the page or not. So you can see it's opening. I could have done a maximize or something, but by default it was just whatever it was. So you can see it's doing the simulate and then doing the clicks. So obviously to speed it up further, I could reduce the delay before and the delay after. So that's to do with the type into. So there's some type into properties I can set, just like I was setting those open modes for the screen. I can do it on each of the text modes, just like you can do each of the type intos, just like you do in the properties in your XAML files. So basically the idea here was just to show you can use your snippets, even though there's no C# snippets available. You can just temporarily, until UiPath put it in, you can just put them as comments in a XAML file. That's how you can include them as snippets and just categorize them the same way as you would in your XAML. The other thing you could do is, the other thing I was highlighting was the fact that you had to pass variables back, had to pass values back from the XAML file. Now obviously if you're running this as a project and you wanted to publish this as a project, now you wanted it to start at the workflow, you just do your normal stuff that you would do in the XAML file, so you can just set that, as your starting file. set as your main. So if you set that as the main, the workflow becomes the main, and then when you do run here rather than debug. So if we run main here, we just do a run, and it's gonna have the work. It's gonna start at the workflow, not at your main, just like you would in your normal XAML file. So I need to reset this, and then it starts going again. So you can see it started from the workflow, not from the main. So you can just, that's the same as how behavior if you had different XAML files. So I'll just stop that. Okay, so that basically covers it. I've given you an idea of, this is just an idea of what you can do. So incorporating your ChatGPT to generate C#, because previously we couldn't use ChatGPT. It wouldn't generate workflows for us, like XAML files, but you can use it to generate a lot of code. You can obviously get a lot of code. So for those from coding backgrounds, and if the projects are a lot more complex, it's a lot easier to use this C#. But of course, I wouldn't do it this way. I would do most of the UI stuff using XAML files, and then I would do all the more complicated stuff, more logic using the workflows. But this is just a sample of what you would do if you were using the workflows to do your UI stuff. Anyway, thanks very much. It's been fun, and I will see you on my next video. Farewell.